In 2004, the Australian Outback burned under a late-season heat wave. A young hiker named Daniel Rourke signed the ranger station log at 9 a.m., then set out alone. Hours later, his boot prints were tracked across red dust until they ended without reason at a dry creek bed. Search teams swept the desert with helicopters, thermal scanners, and grid maps. Radios echoed coordinates, soil samples were bagged, evidence was logged. But the desert gave nothing back. The boots stopped. The man was gone. 2 decades later, the case remains sealed in silence. One folded map, one torn shoe, and an evidence shelf that still whispers his name. The morning Daniel Rourke walked out began without alarm. The ranger on duty, Owen Blakely, logged his name in a lined ledger already faded with dust. The page recorded the time, 9 a.m., and a route penciled in by Rourke himself. The entry was neat, almost mechanical, as if he wanted no room for misunderstanding. Blakely initialed the margin, closed the logbook, and looked once at the young man adjusting his faded blue pack. It was routine. Nothing suggested it would be the last sighting. By mid-morning, the heat swelled across the flats. The soil surface cracked, thin as eggshell. Daniel's boots pressed steady prints in the red dust, aligned with the penciled lines on his folded map. He had packed 3 liters of water, a rolled tarp, and a compass. Nothing more. His experience as a hiker was casual, his preparations amateur, but the ranger log showed no hesitation. At the trailhead, his vehicle remained parked, a rusted sedan with Melbourne plates, registration current. Inside, police later noted a pair of work overalls folded on the back seat, and a mechanic's notebook filled with sketches of gear assemblies. Daniel had been employed in an automotive shop before deciding to see the interior. The car was locked. No tampering. The first confirmed forensic anchor came hours later. At 1 p.m., a pair of German tourists encountered a boot track angled east. They photographed it for reference. The camera time-stamped in metadata. That photograph, preserved on a memory card, would later align perfectly with the size and sole pattern of Daniel's left boot. It was logged, scaled, and placed into the evidence record. Detective Mark Rennell was assigned the disappearance by evening. He stood over the ranger station desk, scanning the open ledger under fluorescent tubes that buzzed faintly. The log confirmed one thing only. Daniel had walked out. Where he had gone afterward was not written. Rennell bagged the logbook's relevant page under chain of custody, stamping his initials on the seal. By sunset, the first helicopter sweep took off. Infrared imaging scanned the dry riverbeds, feeding blurred heat signatures back to a monitor. Each shadow was logged, measured against ground truth. Most were livestock strays or thermal mirages. None matched a human body. Radio transmissions from that night survive as static-filled fragments, time-coded in 20-minute intervals. Sector 7 clear, Sector 8 negative, returning fuel threshold. The folded topographic map carried by Daniel became the investigation's earliest symbol. Rangers knew he had purchased it from a local outfitter 2 days earlier. The receipt, recovered from his glove box, showed the date and time of purchase at 3:45 p.m., along with a cashier's signature. Forensic handwriting comparison confirmed the penciled annotations on the map matched Daniel's script. The map recorded a path no more than 12 kilometers long, looped back toward the creek bed. It was not ambitious, not reckless. On paper, it should have been survivable. Searchers deployed a grid pattern the next morning, marking coordinates with fluorescent tape and logging each square in a binder. Soil samples were taken at intervals of 500 meters. Some bore faint impressions of boot tread. Others yielded nothing. The chain of impressions led outward, then thinned. At the dry creek bed, impressions ended abruptly. No scuff, no drag, no continuation. That abrupt termination would define the case. Every log entry, every forensic report, every testimony circled back to the same barren image. Boot prints that ended as though erased. To the trained eye of Detective Rennell, it suggested interference. Predators, human or otherwise, left traces. Yet here was absence. a blank field where presence should have continued. Years later, analysts re-examined those initial soil bags stored in evidence lockers. Under magnification, quartz grains were ordinary. Mineral composition consistent with the creek bed. No foreign fibers. No trace DNA. Negative results repeated across every sample. What remained in hand was the map, the log entry, the boot impressions measured and photographed. In family interviews, Daniel's mother, Anna Rourke, later described the last phone call. He had spoken plainly, telling her only that he wanted quiet, that he wanted space to think. She recalled no fear in his voice, no sense of pursuit. The statement was logged in interview transcripts and added to the case chronology. It suggested nothing, but the Outback suggested something else. Wide horizons, endless heat, silence that swallowed radio signals. To those who searched, it felt as though the land itself had drawn a line and refused to let a man cross it. The first phase of the investigation closed with nothing but absences. No body, no belongings, no trace beyond a folded map and footprints that halted. It was enough to open a file, but not enough to close it. Bootprints ended in dust at a dry creek bed. Detective Mark Rennell began his second day on the Rourke disappearance with the ritual of command. He cleared the ranger station desk, spread out the logbooks, clipped a blank incident sheet to the board, and aligned a fresh grid overlay across a topographic map. Every disappearance in the Outback began the same way. Squares, lines, coordinates. Nothing was trusted unless it was logged. The first radio call at 7:15 a.m. confirmed deployment. Teams of 6 rangers, supported by volunteers from Alice Springs, stepped off in staggered intervals. Each was assigned a grid square measuring 2 kilometers across. They carried GPS trackers set to ping coordinates at 1-minute intervals, recorded in digital logs. Later, those logs were downloaded, cross-checked, and burned to disk. Chain of custody was signed at each transfer. Even as the land stayed silent, the paper trail grew. By 9 a.m., the search perimeter expanded to 15 kilometers east of the creek. Helicopters circled overhead, their thermal imagers calibrated against body temperature baselines. Operators called out readings to ground teams, cross-referenced by sector code. One shadow near a rock shelf triggered an immediate scramble. The team logged coordinates, moved in, and found only a feral goat carcass half buried in dust. The thermal scanner logged it as negative livestock. The record was time-stamped and archived. Rennell remained on comms, his voice clipped and monotone. "Log it. Move to next sector." He wrote each negative on the incident board, marking X after X across the growing grid. By noon, the pattern was clear. No sign of Daniel Rourke. Evidence collection continued anyway. Every can discarded along possible routes was bagged. 3 aluminum water cans were recovered near the hollow of a dead gum tree, their surfaces dry, their pull tabs intact. Fingerprint powder revealed smudges consistent with human handling, but sweat and dust had blurred ridge detail. 2 partials were lifted, catalogued, and sealed. At the lab, latent analysis confirmed the prints belonged to Rourke, matched against his driver's license record. That confirmed one fact. He had reached that tree, but beyond it, nothing. At 3 p.m., the search teams regrouped. Each squad filed a log sheet, coordinates covered, anomalies noted, samples bagged. Reynolds stapled them into the case binder, his handwriting in the margins. "No sign after can cluster. Print cease." He underlined the last 2 words. The language itself became a forensic anchor. The creek bed was re-examined with cadaver dogs flown in from Darwin. Handlers documented each pass on video, audio synced to timecode. The animals showed brief alert behavior near a shaded gully, then moved on. Later review of the footage showed no sustained signal. The handlers wrote, "Non-conclusive." The page was added to the binder, evidence number 73. At sunset, the incident board was crowded. Pins marked routes searched, tape measured off blind zones. Photographs were clipped with paper fasteners. The folded map Rourke carried was pinned at center, annotated with the positions of the cans and the boot prints already logged. Detective Reynolds stood back, arms crossed, expression fixed. He circled the creek bed in thick red ink. The circle enclosed nothing. Over the next 2 nights, helicopters continued sweeps. Their logs recorded dozens of coordinates, each tied to a negative finding. Volunteers combed dry gullies with torches, calling Rourke's name into silence. Audio recordings captured only wind, static, and distant bird calls. Every tape was labeled, dated, boxed. The evidence archive swelled, even as the case itself refused to move. At 10:03 p.m. on the 3rd night, the helicopter logged a single heat shadow. Coordinates were relayed, ground teams dispatched. The sector was combed under halogen lamps, soil samples taken, GPS tracks recorded. Nothing was found. When the report came back, the wording was blunt. Thermal anomaly, negative. Rennell wrote it on the board and circled it once. Another false lead. Another silence. The search dragged on for 7 days before scaling back. Each step had been recorded, each sample numbered. The desert, indifferent, remained. Thermal scans showed only a single heat shadow, then nothing. The file grew heavier with each passing day, its binders swelling under forms that all said the same thing. Negative. Still, one fragment of evidence pushed the timeline forward. On the morning of the 8th day, a search team flagged 3 empty water cans in the hollow of a dead gum tree. They had been overlooked during the first sweep. Each can was photographed in situ, rulers placed for scale, GPS coordinates logged at 11:22 a.m. Latex gloves handled the retrieval. The cans were slid into brown paper evidence bags, sealed, and marked with accession numbers. At the temporary field post, Detective Rennell supervised the first inspection. Faint ridges smeared along the aluminum glinted under dusting powder. Partial prints, blurred but usable, lifted cleanly onto acetate sheets. The next day, lab comparison confirmed the ridge flow belonged to Daniel Rourke. That confirmation extended the timeline. He had survived long enough to drink through at least part of his water supply and discard the cans. The position of the hollow was logged onto the master map with a red X. Reynolds stood over the evidence board, circling the mark, then drawing a line from the bootprints at the creek to the cluster beneath the tree. The line stopped there. Chain of custody forms documented each transfer, from field post to Darwin Forensic Lab. The cans were signed for, weighed, photographed, then sealed again. Later toxicology swabs showed no trace contaminants, only mineral residue from water. Nothing suggested tampering. It was survival, not sabotage. The discovery raised questions. The cans were 20 meters from a well-trodden kangaroo trail. Search teams had already swept the area twice. Why had the cans not been seen earlier? Either dust had covered them, or they had been shifted. The logbooks recorded no footprints besides Rourke's. Still, Rennell wrote a note in the margin of the search binder. Possible secondary placement, verify. Beyond the gum tree, the ground yielded nothing. No scuffs, no drag marks, no continuation of prints. The soil's surface, coarse and compacted, was ill-suited for preserving tracks. Yet trained trackers insisted there should have been something. Their written statements filled half a dozen pages. Prints terminate without transition, unusual. At the Alice Springs command post, analysts spread the evidence across corkboards. The folded map remained central, pinned and annotated. Beside it hung photographs of the cans, plastic overlays marking fingerprint ridges. 3 red X's now dotted the paper like wounds. Each one was a known point of survival, but they formed no pattern. Theories circulated quietly. Some searchers suggested disorientation, the sun scrambling his sense of direction. Others muttered about interference, the possibility of another presence. Rennell dismissed speculation aloud, but privately his notes betrayed unease. Survival logic breaks. 3 cans, then void. By the second week, media had gathered outside the ranger station. Headlines called Rourke the vanished hiker, photographs of his rusting sedan printed in national dailies. Reporters demanded progress. Rennell held a short press conference, standing stiff behind a table of evidence bags. He pointed once to the map, once to the cans. "These establish presence," he said flatly. "What we need is continuation." Cameras clicked. Questions swelled. He refused to elaborate. Forensic rechecks followed. The cans were tested again for trace fibers. Under halogen light, a single hair fragment was noted clinging to one rim. Microscopic analysis showed it was synthetic, likely nylon, too short to identify further. It was bagged, labeled, accession number 84. The report read simply, "Foreign fiber, no database match." That fragment lingered as a faint clue, a detail small enough to be overlooked, but large enough to gnaw at the case. The evidence board grew, lines of twine linking prints, cans, and the creek bed. Still, the path led nowhere. At night, Reynolds studied the board alone. His eyes settled always on the hollow gum tree photograph, the dark cavity where 3 cans had lain. He circled it in ink, then underlined once, "Last trace." His fingerprints stopped appearing after the 3rd can. Witness interviews began once the grid searches stalled. Detective Reynolds widened his focus beyond the creek bed and the gum tree. In isolated settlements across the Outback, memory lingered in fragments, and every fragment was logged. On the 15th day, 2 backpackers from Adelaide were located. Their interview transcripts, time-stamped at 2:45 p.m. in the ranger station, told a thin story. On the day Rourke vanished, they had stopped for fuel at a service station 70 kilometers east. While paying, they noticed a white ute idling near the pumps. Its driver remained inside, head turned toward the highway. They remembered nothing else, only the dust, the heat, and the glint of sun on a rearview mirror. Reynolds retrieved the CCTV from that service station. The footage was degraded, grainy, the date code flickering with interference. Yet one frame captured a white utility truck with a ladder rack strapped on top. The license plate was obscured by glare. Digital enhancement clarified only 3 characters, 7KD. The fragment was logged, printed, and pinned to the evidence board beside Rourke's map. The report was careful. Vehicle observed, connection unconfirmed. Still, the implication hung in the air. Why had a ute been idling near the route Rourke walked? Other witnesses described less, but every word was recorded. A miner claimed he saw dust rising near the dry creek around noon, as though a vehicle had accelerated suddenly. A station hand swore he heard a voice calling once, sharp, then cut short. Each account was signed, dated, attached to the binder. None could be corroborated. Reynolds pursued the lead anyway. Requests went out for vehicle registration checks. The Northern Territory Records Office produced a list of utes matching the partial sequence. 9 possible matches emerged. Each owner was interviewed, vehicles examined, plates inspected. 8 cleared quickly. 1 remained under suspicion. A white utility registered to Luke Danner, a 35-year-old truck driver with prior citations for disorderly conduct in roadhouses. The search of Danner's vehicle was meticulous. Evidence technicians logged every item in the tray: spanners, grease tins, a spare tire, and mechanical scrap. Photographs documented oil stains and metal shavings scattered across the bed. Soil swabs were taken from wheel wells and mud flaps. Everything was sealed, numbered, and transferred. Days later, results came back negative. No fibers matched the one lifted from Rourke's water can. No soil matched the creek bed. The case file grew denser, the pages heavier, but nothing advanced the path beyond suspicion. Reynolds added a note in red pen. Lead inconclusive, vehicle negative. The folded map still dominated the board. Its creases radiated outward like fault lines, marked now with red circles. The gum tree, the creek bed, the water cans, the CCTV frame of the ute. To anyone else, it looked like clutter. To Reynolds, it was a web with a hole at its center. The family was briefed in the ranger station's back room. Anna Rourke listened in silence, her photocopy of the map folded tightly in her lap. When asked if she remembered Daniel mentioning vehicles or strangers, she shook her head once. "He wanted quiet," she said. Her words were typed into the record, page 132 of the file. Night in the Outback brought little relief. Helicopters had been grounded. Volunteers had gone home, and the desert returned to its own rhythms. Only the evidence board glowed under fluorescent light. The image of the white ute stared back, its license plate fragment a frozen puzzle. License plate fragment read 7KD, the rest torn away. Soil told the next story. Every impression left behind was scraped, bagged, and compared. When technicians re-examined the bootprint photographs from the dry creek bed, they noticed grains clinging to the tread of Rourke's left boot. The samples taken nearby were pulled from the archive, accession numbers 89 through 93. Under low-power magnification, one anomaly emerged: tiny metallic shavings mixed with the sand. The finding was documented in a 12-page lab report. Grain density, particle size, and elemental breakdown were charted. The shavings contained traces of manganese and chromium, alloys consistent with industrial machinery. No such deposits were natural to the creek bed. The anomaly was logged in the forensic chronology. Soil sample, non-native particulates. Rennell pinned the report beside the map. He circled the creek bed in red, added an arrow toward the word metal. The line joined the X's marking the water cans. His board became a layered topography of evidence, paper over paper, each fragment stapled and cross-referenced. Investigators canvassed nearby workshops. Mining outfits, farm stations, and repair yards were inspected. Soil swabs were taken from machine housings, conveyor belts, and welding benches. None matched. Every negative return tightened the void. The desert had produced metal that belonged nowhere. At the same time, the bootprints were remeasured. Photographs were scanned. Scale rulers recalibrated. Depth analysis suggested Rourke had been carrying additional weight near the creek bed. Impressions pressed deeper than those closer to the ranger station. The difference was logged at 2 kilograms of added load. Yet no pack or equipment was found. Speculation entered the margins of the file. Was he carrying something metallic, later removed, or had another presence carried him, leaving the grains behind? Rennell underlined the questions but offered no answer. The family pressed for clarity. In the interview transcript dated June 14th, Anna Rourke asked whether machines had been involved. Rennell answered with the same steady cadence he used for reporters. "We can confirm metallic particles. Origin undetermined." His words were recorded, typed, archived. The search perimeter widened again. Fresh soil samples were scraped from tracks where vehicles had passed weeks earlier. Rangers logged coordinates, labeled vials, returned them under seal. Each one tested ordinary. Only the creek bed samples carried the shaving. The suspicion of interference deepened. Detectives revisited the CCTV still of the white ute. Mechanics were consulted, their reports noting that manganese-chromium alloys were often used in gear casings and engine parts. Could debris have been transported in a vehicle's tray and scattered near the creek? It remained hypothetical. The lab results stood alone, uncorroborated. In a final attempt, Rennell ordered a magnet sweep of the creek bed. Technicians dragged heavy magnets across the dust, collecting filings. A handful of grains clung, glinting faintly in the afternoon sun. They were bagged, logged, sealed. The filing read, "Metallic particulates consistent with prior samples. Quantity insufficient for origin trace." The case file thickened with negatives. Yet one sentence persisted across reports. "Non-native metal at termination point." It became a refrain, repeated in briefings, underlined in summaries, whispered in corridors. The Outback had given up a trace that belonged nowhere else. Metal shavings not native to the desert were bagged. The discovery of metal shavings shifted the case from accident to suspicion. For Detective Rennell, it marked the first time the word predator entered his private notes. Yet building a case without a body demanded more than anomalies. It demanded persistence. Family traveled north to press for answers. On July 3rd, Anna Rourke arrived at Alice Springs Station with her daughter, carrying a photocopy of Daniel's folded map. The edges were already creased from constant unfolding. She set it on the table during briefing, tracing her finger over the penciled loop. "He was careful," she said. The words were recorded. Transcript page 187. Rennell logged her testimony, then asked if Daniel had mentioned strangers. She shook her head. silence lingered. The photocopied map lay between them, its smudged route identical to the one pinned in evidence. Two versions of the same object, one in plastic, one in a mother's hands, spoke of presence and absence at once. Meanwhile, pressure mounted to produce a suspect. The name that surfaced most often was a prospector who frequented dry creek zones. His journals were seized under warrant, bound in dust-stained leather, pages filled with notes of mineral finds. Among them were penciled sketches of terrain eerily similar to Rourke's map. Handwriting analysts compared samples. Their report, accession number 112, presented side-by-side charts of slant, loop formation, and pressure. The conclusion was unambiguous. Significant divergence, no match. The prospector was released. His notes returned. The lead evaporated. Still, questions multiplied. Why did the soil show foreign metal? Why did prints stop at the creek without drag or scuff? Why were Rourke's last confirmed possessions 3 empty cans? In absence of answers, suspicion hovered. The case board reflected this tension. The folded map in its evidence sleeve remained pinned dead center. Around it clustered the photos of the cans, the bootprint images, the CCTV frame of the ute, and now the handwriting comparison sheet. Red twine connected them, but every line ended in a blank margin. At night, Rennell studied the board in silence. He penciled one word beside the creek bed circle: interference. He did not elaborate. Anna Rourke continued her visits. Each time she asked the same question: is he still out there? Each time, Rennell gave the same answer: we don't know. The repetition itself became a ritual, noted in transcripts as though repetition might change meaning. By the end of the second month, official search operations wound down. Volunteers were released, helicopters reassigned, budgets exhausted. The final report read, no remains, no personal effects beyond logged items, case status unresolved. For the family, that closure was intolerable. For Rennell, it was the beginning of a file that would never leave his desk. The prospector's handwriting diverged. Case returned to emptiness. 2 years passed before the evidence locker opened again. The case file remained cold, but one call from a station hand led detectives back to the desert. A boot had been found, wedged in the fork of a dry gully. When the evidence team arrived, the object was photographed in situ, rulers aligned, GPS coordinates logged at 2:16 p.m. The boot was sun-cracked, its leather split at the toe. Dust filled the interior, but on the outer surface ran 3 jagged scrapes, as though claws or rough metal edges had raked it. Bagged and sealed, the boot was accession number 157. At the lab, fiber analysts lifted strands from the torn edge. Under magnification, blue filaments appeared, synthetic, consistent with nylon. The strands were too short for source identification, but foreign enough to be noted. The report read, blue fibers, non-environmental, origin undetermined. Detective Rennell added the boot photograph to the evidence board. Beside the folded map and the X's marking the water cans, he pinned the new image with a heavy staple. He drew an arrow from the creek bed to the gully, marking it in red ink. The boot's condition raised new questions. There was no sign of weathering consistent with 2 years exposed. Its leather was worn, but not desiccated enough for the desert's extremes. Lab notes suggested it had been deposited later, not contemporaneous with Rourke's last movements. If true, someone had moved it. Interviews followed. Station hands in the area denied tampering. No one admitted handling the boot. Yet the coordinates showed the gully lay within the original grid search zone, an area supposedly cleared in 2004. How had the boot escaped notice? Family was notified. Anna Rourke received the news in a curt phone call. A boot believed to be Daniel's has been located. She traveled north again, carrying her photocopied map. At the evidence viewing, she stared at the boot through glass. "That's his," she said, her voice steady. Her statement was logged. Transcript page 212. The boot was compared to Rourke's purchase records from a Melbourne outfitter. Receipts confirmed the brand and model. The tread pattern matched the prints photographed near the creek. It was, without doubt, his, yet its reappearance deepened the void. Forensic reconstruction placed the boot in the gully sometime after the initial search, but no soil disturbance suggested recent placement. The paradox joined the file as another unanswered anomaly. On the board, the blue fibers were taped beside the boot image. Their color stood out against the monochrome of soil and maps. Rennell underlined them twice. He wrote in the margin, "Non-native material, potential contact trace." What the fibers clung to and why remained a question that the desert refused to answer. Blue fibers clung where skin should have been. By 2006, the investigation had narrowed into geography. Detective Rennell ordered a full reconstruction of Daniel Rourke's path using Ranger GPS data. Patrol vehicles had logged coordinates throughout the search effort, each ping stored in a central file. Analysts overlaid those points against the master topographic map. A pattern emerged, not in what was covered, but in what was absent. There was a blind zone, a stretch of land 6 kilometers long, curving like a sickle east of the dry creek bed. The Ranger GPS logs showed no coverage there, the trackers silent. It was not intentional. Terrain had blocked signal, leaving a corridor of silence. In every reconstruction, that zone lay precisely where Rourke's bootprints had stopped. Rennell pinned the GPS overlay to the board. He drew a thick circle around the blind corridor, labeling it Gap. His notes beneath read, "Possible interference, exploit zone." Teams revisited the area. Soil was scraped, rocks overturned, gullies scanned. Nothing. But the silence of the logs gave the place a new weight. If Rourke had crossed into it, no tracker would have recorded. If something else had moved within it, the record would remain blank. Specialists proposed predator models, patterns of disappearances where terrain shielded activity. Cases from Northern Territory archives were reviewed, instances where bootprints ended near communication dead zones. Comparisons were logged, highlighted in blue marker. No clear match, but enough to suggest method. In interviews, rangers admitted frustration. One said, "We assumed coverage, we didn't check." His statement was typed, page 264. Another added, "If he walked in, we'd never have known." Those lines became part of the file's growing chorus of failure. Family members pressed again. Anna Rourke studied the new overlay with silent eyes. She placed her photocopied map beside the evidence board, the blind zone looming between the creases. "That's where he is," she whispered. The transcript captured the words exactly, without commentary. Rennell made no promise. Instead, he filed a requisition for aerial surveys. Satellite imagery from 2004 was requested, but clouds and low resolution blurred the ground. One frame showed faint tire tracks near the edge of the blind zone. Analysts argued over scale. Were they old mining routes or recent vehicle impressions? The debate filled 20 more pages. No conclusion reached. The evidence board now carried layers. Bootprints terminating, water cans clustered, metallic shavings logged, blue fibers pinned, and at the center, a circled void marked Gap. To Rennell, it resembled an absence drawn in ink. At night, he wrote in the margin of his notebook, "Predator uses geography." He closed the book without expanding the thought. The blind zone aligned with the vanished footprints. By 2007, the investigation circled around names rather than maps. The partial plate 7KD still haunted the board, its fragment of data too sharp to ignore. Registration sweeps had narrowed the pool to a handful of owners, but one stood apart. Luke Danner, a 35-year-old long-haul truck driver. Danner's record was thin, but troubling. Police reports documented late-night altercations at roadhouses. Witness statements described harassment of female patrons, belligerence when intoxicated. None rose to the level of felony, but each left a trace. His vehicle, a white ute with ladder rack, matched the blurred CCTV frame. Detective Rennell secured a warrant. On July 18th, technicians examined the truck in a roadhouse parking lot. The process was methodical. Photographs from every angle, license plate rubbings, soil swabs from wheel wells, and fiber lifts from the seats. Every item was bagged, sealed, and logged. The inventory ran 7 pages. Spanners, grease tins, an oil-stained tarp, and a broken timing belt. Forensic testing followed. Soil analysis came back negative, no quartz composition matching the dry creek bed. Fiber samples showed common polyester, not the blue nylon lifted from Rourke's boot. Grease stains, when tested by chromatography, matched automotive compounds, but not the alloy traces identified in the soil samples. Every comparison closed with the same word: exclusion. Rennell updated the board grimly. He pinned the negative reports beside the CCTV still, drew a line, then crossed it out. The suspect remained under suspicion, but the evidence spoke otherwise. Danner was interviewed for 6 hours. The transcript revealed a man deflecting, joking, then lapsing into silence. Asked if he had been near the creek bed, he replied, "Don't even know where that is." His words were flat, unprovable either way. The family followed developments closely. Anna Rourke read every line of the reports. In a meeting room, she stared at Danner's photograph across the table. "That's him," she said once, quietly. But witness identification without evidence meant nothing in court. Her statement was typed, archived, and underlined. Family belief only, no corroboration. Public pressure intensified. Media outlets speculated openly about Danner, splashing his name alongside headlines about the Outback predator. Police officials cautioned against defamation. The file thickened with media clippings, stapled under a separate tab. Still, Rennell could not dismiss him. He pinned a single note beneath the CCTV still: opportunity present, evidence absent. It became his private mantra, repeated whenever the file crossed his desk. The ute was released. Danner returned to the road. The investigation collapsed back into silence. All swabs returned negative. The suspicion evaporated. By 2008, the official inquiry had gone dormant. Funding for extended searches dried up. Helicopters were reassigned, and the incident board was dismantled from the ranger station wall. The file, swollen with binders, was boxed and shelved. For most, the Rourke disappearance became another unsolved line in a ledger. For Detective Rennell, it remained unfinished business. A break came from outside. The Rourke family, unsatisfied with silence, contracted a private forensic laboratory in Melbourne to re-examine archived evidence. With written authorization, sealed exhibits were couriered south. Chain of custody logs documented each transfer: soil samples, fiber fragments, the boot, and the 3 empty cans. The lab's methods were sharper than those used in 2004. Chromatography isolated residues on the boot leather that earlier tests had overlooked. Analysts found traces of industrial grease, a compound thickened with graphite, used primarily in heavy mechanical bearings. This finding was logged as non-environmental, man-made origin. Photographs showed black smears along the split seams, invisible to the naked eye but vivid under halogen light. The soil samples were also retested. Metallic particulates remained, consistent with manganese-chromium alloys. The grease traces overlapped with them chemically, strengthening the hypothesis of machinery contact. Yet the match did not align with any registered mining or farm equipment in the region. The lab compared to 50 grease reference samples drawn from local industries. All were excluded. The fiber fragment lifted from the boot in 2006 was scrutinized again. Under scanning electron microscopy, its cross-section confirmed nylon, dyed with an industrial-grade pigment used in tarps and load straps. The report concluded, foreign textile, source unknown, probable synthetic equipment covering. Rennell flew south to receive the results personally. He stood in the lab's white-lit conference room, flipping through pages stamped with accession numbers and graphs. To him, the findings formed a line of contact: boot with grease, soil with metal, fiber with tarp. All pointed toward machinery. All excluded the natural environment. The case board was rebuilt in Melbourne. The folded map was pinned once more at the center, now surrounded by laminated lab sheets. Red circles linked the creek bed to grease, metal, and nylon. The web grew tighter, but no suspect entered its strands. The family attended the briefing. Anna Rourke sat at the far end of the table, photocopied map still in her bag. She listened as lab staff explained their findings in precise, clinical tones. When they finished, she spoke one sentence: "He didn't just vanish. Something took him." The words were transcribed. Page 306 of the file. Media seized on the new angle. Headlines reframed the case as "Mechanical Clues in Outback Mystery." Articles speculated on unlicensed mining rigs, rogue equipment, or transport vehicles operating illegally. None could be substantiated. Police spokesman reiterated the absence of direct suspect. Rennell updated his own notes. "Predator human, machine-assisted," he wrote. It was the first time he had framed the disappearance as an intentional act, not accident. Yet he knew it remained theory. Courts required evidence that spoke louder than grease smears and nylon fibers. The Outback remained silent. The blind zone near the creek stayed empty. The map held its loop of pencil lines, and the file, heavier now with private lab reports, returned once again to storage. The grease sample matched no registered machine in the region. 8 more years passed before the case surfaced again. In 2016, Northern Territory Police began digitizing old files, scanning photographs, logbooks, and evidence sheets into a central archive. The Rourke file, stored in 4 binders and 2 sealed boxes, was queued for processing. Technicians laid each page on a flatbed scanner, assigning accession codes to every item. Among the papers was a photograph taken by Ranger Owen Blakely in 2004. It showed Daniel Rourke standing at the trailhead minutes before departure. He faced away from the camera, adjusting his pack straps. In his back pocket was the folded topographic map. The creases were visible, edges darkened with sweat. But in the scanned image, something else appeared. A pencil mark on the map's margin, a small cross drawn beside an unmarked gully. That mark was not present on the original map stored in evidence. Analysts compared both documents side by side. Under magnification, the original carried only the penciled loop route. The photograph showed an additional cross, faint but clear. If genuine, it meant Rourke had marked a point unseen on modern survey maps, and that mark had vanished before the map entered evidence. Metadata confirmed the photograph's date, April 12, 2004, 10 minutes after Rourke signed the ranger station log. The image had remained overlooked for 12 years, filed without analysis. Now it became a new forensic anchor. Rennell, retired but still monitoring the case, was contacted. He studied the scanned photo on a monitor, his reflection dark in the glass. He requested the negative. Under enhanced scanning, the pencil cross persisted. No artifact of shadow or dust. It was deliberate. The gully it referenced was mapped during digitization. Satellite overlays placed it inside the blind zone identified years earlier. Analysts flagged the coincidence. Bootprints ended at the creek. The blind zone lay beyond, and Rourke's map showed a cross within it. Theories fractured again. Did he intend to explore the gully? Did someone else add the mark? If so, why had it been erased before the map was sealed in evidence? Forensic handwriting analysis compared the cross with Rourke's notebook sketches. The slant and pressure matched his hand. The conclusion read, "Probable authorship, Rourke." Anna Rourke was informed. Shown the scanned photo, she pressed her palm against the screen, her photocopied map clutched in the other hand. "He drew it for a reason," she said. Her words were logged. Transcript page 384. Police revisited the gully. Teams scraped soil, drilled cores, and photographed every contour. The reports came back empty. No fibers, no remains, no metallic traces. The desert had flattened any mark over 12 years. The case file swelled again, now with digital layers. The photograph was pinned to the new evidence board, printed large. The faint cross circled in red. It stared from the center like a silent instruction never fulfilled. The extra mark led nowhere on modern surveys. 2 decades after the disappearance, the file sat in the evidence locker like a relic. Inside the climate-controlled room, shelves sagged under plastic sleeves, paper binders, and sealed boxes. On the spine of one box was stenciled a fading label. Rourke, Daniel, Outback, 2004. Every item remained logged, every accession number intact. The folded map lay within its nylon sleeve, creases stiff with age. The water cans were stacked in cardboard, surfaces dulled but fingerprints preserved on acetate lifts. The torn boot rested in its carton, nylon fibers sealed in vials beside it. Soil samples were stored in capped tubes, their metallic shavings still glinting faintly under halogen light whenever examined. Each item was cross-referenced in the master inventory list, last signed by a clerk in April 2024. Detective Rennell, long retired, visited once more that year. He walked the aisle slowly, clipboard in hand, and stopped before the box. He signed the access log, the same steady hand that had written on the board 20 years earlier. Inside, nothing had changed. Evidence endured. Answers had not. The family's life carried the same fracture. Anna Rourke attended the 20th anniversary memorial in Melbourne, her photocopied map folded in her purse, edges nearly translucent from use. She had shown it to reporters so often that the inked lines blurred. "We never buried him," she said in a clipped voice. "We only buried our questions." Her statement was typed into the anniversary transcript, page 412. Media coverage flared again, briefly. Articles retold the case, focusing on anomalies. Prints that ended, soil that carried metal, grease without a machine, nylon without a source. Commentators called it the Outback Predator mystery. Police declined to speculate. The official line remained unchanged. Case unresolved. The blind zone near the creek was revisited with drones, high-resolution cameras sweeping gullies. Once more, the land gave nothing back. Tire marks, animal traces, weather scars, all modern. The past remained buried. Rennell knew the pattern by then. Forensic echoes without closure, objects without sequence, traces without context. He closed the inventory sheet, returned the box to the shelf, and signed the exit line. His initials looked smaller than before. The map remained at the center, an ordinary object elevated by absence. It had begun the file and would likely end it. Folded paper, smudged pencil, lines drawn across land that erased its walker. 20 years later, it spoke no louder than on the day it was bagged. The folded map lay sealed, its creases holding silence.